and Israel. We have records coming from Egypt and elsewhere that around 2100 there's a severe drought. Perhaps the drought that also is affecting the Ur-3 state at this time, but it prompts a massive migration of Amorites from the west to begin coming down into the east, where they're seeking more fertile lands to graze their flocks. And we see Amorites beginning to disrupt these supply chains and really causing a problem for the settled peoples. And again, this very regimented Ur-3 state. This is a state that likes to have everything fit into its specific place, right? Down to what you're going to get if you're of a certain status and of a certain place. Everything is regulated. The idea of people sort of just living off of the land and moving and doing what they please is totally anathema. And so we see this actually in texts that discuss the Amorites who are attacking and starting to really become a problem during this period, this tension between settled and unsettled peoples. That's something that we saw as early as the Uruk period and something we'll continue to see. But we have texts from the Ur-3 period that talk about the Amorites and describe them in not such pleasant terms. There's a text that says, "The Amorites who know no grain, who know no house nor town, the morons of the mountains who dig up truffles and don't bend their knees to cultivate the land. These Amorites who eat raw meat, who have no house during their lifetimes, and who are not buried after they die. They eat a slurry of wheat and grain, but an Amorite won't even know what it contains." So again, you see this very sharp distinction that the kings and the administrators of the Ur-3 Empire are drawing between civilized and uncivilized people, right? And they're hitting all those key traits, right? They don't have cities. They don't have cultivation. They have no architecture or houses. They don't even bury their dead. They don't cook their food. These are people who are barbaric in every sense of the word. This gets really bad for the kings of the Ur-3. The Amorites continue to press from the northeast down to the south. I'm sorry, from the northwest to the southeast. And it gets so bad that Ibbi Sin actually ends up trying to build a wall between the Tigris and the Euphrates. A massive wall, 170 miles across. Again, right, this is from our period of king as builder. Well, he's going to do what a builder does and try to defend the empire by building this massive wall. Whenever anybody builds a giant wall to keep people out, this is clearly a sign of total desperation. This never, ever works. But in any event, he did try, and it gives you a sense of again, the problem that these Amorites were causing. Jump ahead. We also see, there's one more. We're familiar with the Elamites. We talked about Elam, who at this time are being taxed and governed by the Ur-3 state. We see the emergence of another group of people called the Hurrians during this time. And the Hurrians speak a totally different language. They're associated with the Trans-Caucasian cultures of the third millennium up in the north. They're going to be important quite a bit later when we start talking about Anatolia and the Hittites. But during this time, they establish a small area of control in the far north of Mesopotamia, and they'll later be quite important. So just kind of keep them in mind up here. The Amorites and Elamites exert continual pressure on the collapsing Ur-3 state, and more we see the breaking away of city-states like Nippur. These independent city-states emerge and lead to a period called the Isin-Larsa period, and then the Old Babylonian period and Old Assyrian period in the north. We're going to be addressing each of those in turn. But with these supply lines shattered, the state becomes very weak and susceptible to increasing raids by the Elamites from the east. Elamite armies begin marching from places like Susa into the south. And by 2004, Ur is captured. Ur falls. We saw how often in these cases of taking a capital, you'll take booty, right? You'll take trophies. For example, right, our copperhead of our Akkadian king ends up In Elam, it's taken. We'll see the stele of Hammurabi was found there too. It was taken. In this case, they don't take any stelae or monuments. They actually take the king himself. Ibbi-Sin is hauled off by the Elamites. The total insult, to Sumer, and actually sent into exile. He's kidnapped and brought to Elam, where he ends his life there. So the Ur-3 period is drawing to a close. And what we find is that in a lot of the locations where these Amorites have settled, they begin to seize power. And we see the emergence of rulers of these city-states with clearly Amorite names, places like Isin and Larsa. Babylon, which up to this point has been a relatively unimportant town, is taken by the Amorites, and under the rulership of an Amorite king named Hammurabi, who you're probably all familiar with and we'll talk about next week, we see Babylon become an incredibly important city as it rises to power under his reign. But the fall of the Ur-3 period and the rise of these Amorite kingdoms brings about quite a bit of political and economic and social change. That regulatory system begins to fall apart, and the kings of these now independent city-states have a very different philosophy, it seems. They free many of the inhabitants from the taxes and forced labor that they were suffering under, or theoretically suffering under, during the Ur-3 period. They encourage merchants and private enterprise to flourish. The resources of the land itself, they no longer belong to the gods or to the temple. Priests are still important, right? But now they preside mostly over religious ceremonies, and they have much less secular power, or much less secular power. So really, there's this loosening up that's taking place as the Ur-3 state collapses. We talked about that at the end of the Akkadian Empire too. When these periods of collapse occur, it's really a time for innovation and a time for new things to be tried. That said, as much change is brought in by these Amorite kings, they really retain, it's kind of amazing how much Sumerian culture they adopt. They adopt the same gods, the same traditions. They continue to recopy myths in Sumerian, and really we see the continuity of a lot of practice and a lot of what we've come to expect. So there's a lot of continuity, as we'll see, as we kind of move out of the Ur-3 period and into the second millennium and the Middle Bronze Age, so from around 2000 to 1600. And we're going to be covering a number of different cultures as we leave the Ur-3 period and see the way that these Amorite states and other cultures that are taking the opportunity to establish themselves during this period begin to take hold. So before we kind of move, again, it's a nice break, right? We're going to start talking about the Middle Bronze Age. Any questions about anything we've looked at in the Ur-3 period? Any of these structures or law codes? Anything that's unclear before we move on? Okay, all right. So let's keep moving then. So we're going to begin in the north and see what takes place again with this period of fragmentation. The city of Ashur, which you can see right here, becomes very important. It's located in northern Mesopotamia, in an area that relies relatively on dry farming. Right, this is in our dry farming area. Not much canalization taking place. And it has a very, very long history, but specifically during what is known as the Old Assyrian period from around 1950 to 1750 BCE, this city becomes quite important. We see an Amorite ruler by the name of Shemshi-Adad I take power in the north, and he actually founds a capital at a place called Shubat Enlil. In fact, I've got these right here. So there's Shubat Enlil. And one of the first things that he does is to capture two major cities. We see this process again, right? The establishment of a small kingdom in the north. And he takes the cities of Mari and the cities of Ashur. And just looking at this map, why would you want these cities if you're king? Why would these be very high on your list? Sorry? Yes, exactly, right? Mari is on the Euphrates and Ashur is on the Tigris. You're controlling these trade routes, you're controlling rivers, these north-south access points, and also both cities are important in terms of their east-west trade routes, right? They're these points at which land routes and sea routes come together in very important cities. Shemshi-Adad is a pretty interesting character. While we know he's not a native Assyrian king, the later Assyrian Empire that emerges in this region, later kings do claim that he was originally Assyrian. We have 17 generations of people before him, though, so we know he is not from the area. He's definitely an Amorite who's taking power here. And we don't have very much. The closest thing we have to an image of Shemshi-Adad is from the Mardin stele, which is here, in which Shemshi is, again, driving an axe into the head of an enemy. The constellation of these city-states that he founds becomes pretty important, and in order to control them, he relies on installing family members as local governors. This is something we've seen before. Although we actually have correspondence between them. He installs his two sons, Yemshi-Adad, and you can see them, Dagan and Yasma-Adad, in these two city-states. Yasma-Adad takes control of Mari, and Dagan takes control of Akaltam, a site that's near Ashur. And it's interesting, the correspondence between the father and these sons gives us some insight into the dynamics of how this proto-empire was run up in the north, this old Assyrian empire. We get the idea that Shemshi was a particularly hard father, or Yasma-Adad was a particularly incompetent ruler. Shemshi writes to his son, "Are you a child, not a man? Have you no beard on your chin? While your brother is victorious in the south, you lie in your city doing nothing among the women." So pretty harsh words from the father. Of course, when your father is the king, it's probably not that easy. Dagan, his brother, also criticizes Yasma-Adad, and he writes to him, "Why are you setting up a wail about this thing? This is not great conduct." Later we have texts where he suggests that his brother shouldn't write directly to their father, but to use him as an intermediary. He says, "Write to me that which you're intending to write to the king, so that when possible I can advise you myself." And elsewhere he exclaims, "Why don't you just show some sense?" Again, this could be a genuine desire for brothers to be trying to help each other out, or it could be one son politically maneuvering against the other, right? "Oh, tell me everything you're going to tell the king, and then I'll filter it through for you." Especially since we get the sense that Dagan was a better ruler during this period, telling his brother to show some sense. Well, we'll discuss Mari in depth tomorrow, but it appears that Yasma-Adad never gained that sense. Mari was eventually taken over and becomes